Well, welcome to yet another lockdown session. We're fortunate enough tonight to have Alyssa and David from Lion Breweries. Alyssa's actually really at work, so that makes it interesting for her. But and David's at home, so he managed to sup on the beers. So how long have you got with us for, Alyssa?
I can give you as much time as you need. How long do you guys usually go for?
Oh, I can go on and on.
Okay.
No more than 3 hours.
Yeah. I'll do my prezzo and then I might head off after the Q&A. Yeah.
Sure.
Cool. Do you want me to whip into it?
Yeah, let's go. Thank you.
I'll just share my screen.
Speaker.
Cool. So yeah, I'm just hiding your guys' my view of you. So if you have any questions, just yell out or just end, I guess. So currently I'm a brewing and beverage team leader, which is what Dave was recently. Now he's a packaging team leader. But prior to this current role, I was a development brewer. And so I'll talk probably a bit more to that today. So a bit of background on me. I actually am from Invercargill and studied at Otago University. I did a BSc honours in biochemistry before going to Castles and Sons. So that's for those of you who don't know, that's just a small brewery out of Christchurch. And at the time, it was just myself and 2 other guys. So Simon Bretherton from he worked at Little Creatures in Australia for a bit, and he came from Boddingtons as well. And then the other guy I was working with at Castles was Cameron Burgess, who actually runs his own brewery now out of Christchurch called Southpaw Brewing. It's pretty cool.
David, we're probably going to crack if you've got the Lion Beers, we're going to crack the Apparition Hazy IPA if you've got.
I didn't make it to the supermarket. I'm going to go for a derelict. Sorry, I'll pretend it's a Max.
Cool. And so then, I was in Castles for about 18 months before getting a job at Lion. So moved from Christchurch to Auckland and started work at the Pride. So the first role, I was actually working as a lab technician and did that for a period of time, and then got a role doing sensory support for a couple of months before going into packaging, where I was a packaging coordinator, which is basically just the 2IC for the packaging team leader on the can and keg line. So that was pretty good. You get to see all the machines running, learn how to operate them all, and obviously facilitate any sort of people kind of stuff, which was pretty good. And then I got the opportunity to join the what was at the time the R&D team. So the role was called Innovation Brewer, and it basically supported a bunch of different functions. So we would often get briefs, like liquid briefs. So some coming from the R&D team. Obviously, the R&D team is scoping new technologies, new techniques, new products, all that kind of stuff. And so we would support the pilot trial version of that. The other way that we would get a brief would be from the insights team. And so these are people who are actively reviewing global trends. They're looking at competitor products and if we have any gaps in our portfolio. And also when there might be options to develop SKUs, whether it be from a packaging perspective, which I probably wouldn't have too much to do with, or extending the max range, for example, by adding new limited releases or permanent SKUs.
So when you're doing the pilot or the test size, what scale were you doing that at?
The brew kit that I was using was a 50 hectolitre one, but we did use a grain father. So I've got some pictures of the pilot kit further down.
Oh, okay, cool.
But it's only 50 hectolitres in the kettle, so yeah, pretty small. And then obviously the massive scale up for the Pride.
50 hectolitres isn't small for us. That's gigantic.
50 litres, I should say. It's 50 litres, I should say. Sorry.
You know your deep creek with the decimal point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So then obviously development part of it is like research, so investigating the type of beer that they want to make. So for example, the hazy, how you'd make it, all the different types of materials that you might use. You'd also then start to do trial brews and a technical risk assessment, which is that TRA. So obviously going into different sites, you might have different limitations in terms of capital that you've got at site, like the plant and things like that. And then any other sort of complications with introducing new raw materials, if there's a different way that we need to process it, and yeah, all those kind of risks. And then consumer research. So once you've gone through the trial brews and development, then you can actually, put it to the consumer, get some feedback, and that can look like a bunch of different things. Formalize consumer research, you can do smaller in-house groups, and yeah. And then implementation is obviously site setup. I won't drag on that too much because you can probably imagine a bunch of it, but I can obviously talk to more detail later. So this is the pilot kit. So it's super old school. I think it came from Khyber Pass, and my colleague said it was about over 50 years old. So this here is actually a hot liquor tank. It's heated. There's an element. It's partially automated because we can control it on the TV screen or the computer monitor, sorry. But there's obviously still manual hand valves and things like that. Then this is just a defunct for the plant, so don't worry about that. So you've got your hot liquor tank, your mash tun. So the mash tun is basically heated from a keg that's filled with water that recirculates around the jacket for the mash tun. So it actually works pretty well. But that is the mash tun, and this is also the agitator as well, so you can keep it mixing during.
But you wouldn't be bothering with step mashes or anything like that, would you? You'd just be going for straight 66 degrees, or? No,
you can do step mashes and stuff. So you have that capacity to be able to increase it incrementally. It just takes a bit of time. So we typically do step mashes and stuff, but it just depends on the operation. So like, for example, I had to design a recipe for the fermentist in Christchurch, and I knew that the kit could only do one single temp during the mashing, so we only would design recipes for that specific bit of kit that way. Whereas the Pride, we do step mashes, so we would typically do that for the recipe.
So you do step mash on a big scale?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So on your mash tun, this kind of thing. So you're actually using a jacketed around what size tun is it? What size vessel? For your mash tun?
It is, I think it's like 35 litres maximum.
Cool. And you're actually finding that you're able to shift, thermal shift pretty easily with that?
It's pretty good, but I have to say it's a bit of a knack to basically, because like I said, you're circulating the water around the jacket.
Mm.
So if I needed to increase the temperature, I just stop the recirculation, send it back to the keg where it's got the heating element, then it heats up. And then
but you find that you actually get, without you have to mix the mash or anything like that, you'll actually get the heat. It's just something with it that quite a few had a look at, but you're the first one I know who's actually using something like that. And you find that like you can actually get bring the mash up without having to stir it or agitate it.
Yeah, no, we do. So this bit here, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but there is, we have an agitator. So we typically have that going all the time to be able to keep the temperature pretty homogeneous. So
gotcha.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah. And then once we go through that, that's the lauter. So we actually have a pump at the back of the mash tun and a hose that we just hook up to be able to transfer that into the lauter. And it's just got a bit of a mesh bed, so mesh plate, so we can obviously lauter.
So you're pumping the mash up there, or you just?
Yes. So there's a pump behind it. It's just kind of those basic small kind of pumps that you see at most breweries. I can't remember the type, but they're just a rotor pump, I think. And then there's a hose that connects up from the pump up to here.
So that doesn't get blocked with mesh and.
Nah, it's massive. It's like, I'm not very good at inches, but I think it's like a 1.5 inch pipe. So you just pipe it up. You just transfer
70 mil.
Yeah, and then once the volume of the liquid's in there and the mash, so everything's all in there, you actually let it settle for a couple of minutes, and then this here is our wee peristaltic pump that draws off a small bit of liquid from the volume and recirculates it. So it goes out to the bottom here and then goes around up back into here to be able to clarify the work. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was curious of, again, mash pumps at that kind of scale. It's pretty cool. So you're just using like just a standard centrifugal, brewery pump or something like that. Do you have a soft impeller on it, or is it just stock standard?
To be honest, I think it's just a stock standard one. Like it's cool. Pretty basic, yeah. And yeah, once we've obviously got the clarification, so we've got clear tubing there, you can just see when it's clarified. It's pretty straightforward. And then this is our kettle. So moving into the kettle, this is our flue, I guess. And then we have obviously condensation that we put cooling on this, so that we can have it controlled, so we're not going to get a massive amount of steam coming through the brewery, the pilot plant, and yeah, that's pretty much it. This is our whirlpool, so pretty basic. We transfer from the bottom of the kettle to the out. This swing then comes around and we transfer it into the whirlpool action. We can add a whirlpool hops at this stage, might leave it for 2 to 3 minutes, so not a huge amount of time, and then it actually gets transferred out via the exact same sort of pump here, transfers this into our fermenters. And these are our fermenters. So maximum 50 litres, and you transfer from the bottom here, bottom valve, that's our whirlpool there. So these are glycol cooled, and it's all automated, so it's pretty easy and straightforward to use. And yeah, nice and easy process. So once it's all filled up, we have a sinter kind of stone that hooks in the bottom here, and an oxygen gas tank over here. So we're able to oxygenate, and we obviously measure the DO to a target 15 ppm, or varies depending on the kind of brew that we're doing. And just trying to think if there's anything else. Yeast, depending on the kind of yeast we're using, sometimes it's from the plant that we use, sometimes it's dehydrated and we're rehydrating, and then we're going to add it into the top here once we've reached our target oxygenation level. And then we just let it.
Are you fermenting under pressure there?
It goes to about, we allow it to climb to 0.5. We don't apply pressure, but we let it go to 0.5 bar, and then release beyond that point.
So that's 7 psi. Yeah. So we let it climb naturally, just rather than cool. And then this here is obviously at the end of our fermentation. We transfer it to actually corny kegs, which are essentially our CSCs or our mat tanks. So they go in the chiller. If we need to dry hop or anything like that, we'll dry hop into those directly and just mix as required, and then hold them for maybe 2 or 3 days with the dry hopping. And then this is our bright beer tank, which is just an old thumb. So we can carbonate and filter into this. Sorry, filter into this, then carbonate this, and then we actually can connect this gooseneck up to our bottling line, which I didn't actually take a photo of, but it's pretty straightforward. But yeah, and that is pilot plant manufacturing, I guess. Did you guys have any more questions around that kit specifically, or? So how much? So if it started 50 years old, it's only the pump for recirculating the mash, and a few temperature controls would be the only recent additions then.
Yeah, potentially. Obviously it came from Khyber Pass, so it would have got a lot of modifications coming over, but the bulk of it's pretty old, and there's lots of things that are like defunct on it that we don't typically use. But like the guy that I work with, Goldie, he's got it down to a pretty fine knack, so you get pretty consistent brews out of it. It's pretty easy to step up the temp in the mash tun. Gets a really good boil going, so it basically achieves what you need it to do, which is really good.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, cool. So products. So the first, when I moved into the role,
very first project I got was actually a sour ale, a blueberry sour ale. So that was fun. It actually got a bronze award, which was good. It was a limited release. It was a goza style, so we had coriander and salt. We had blueberry juice into it.
I remember that bit. I didn't remember it was one of yours. Well done.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting one, but yeah, so it was a good learning experience as well, first one. So yeah, and then obviously apparition, which is permanent skew. So I think there are a couple of other wee projects I did in between sourpuss and apparition. I probably won't talk to all my products today because there's some that we've done and they've bombed with all test and learns, and there's some that we would develop and then with the projects would just not go ahead. But the apparition actually started off with a homebrew with my dad, which is here, and then his buddy Paul. And we had a grandfather at home, so we just did a homebrew. And then over time, I slowly developed it and tweaked it, and obviously made multiple batches in the pilot plant. And that is how we kind of got apparition, is what it is today.
Yeah, well, some of us are drinking it now. So,
yeah.
Did the malt? How did you develop the malt bill? And so this was like going back to the early days of hazies, or how long ago was it?
I think it was a 2018-19 project that I started it. So I wouldn't say it was the early days because obviously like the hazies were pretty prominent. Obviously in the craft scene, really popular. The States have been doing them for a long time and it was, you know, pretty big. And then obviously Lion really wanted to get in there and do one. The malt bill, I mean, the recipe is pretty much, I would assume, how most brewers figure out recipes. You research the style, you research the potential color and haze and malt growth and flavor profile that you want to go for. So you just pull on that. I think, to be honest, the hop selection for me was the biggest part because it's such a key part of the process to try and get those fruity characteristics. So working with suppliers like Bintani to try and figure out all the different varieties that we could work with, which has its limitations when you come to a larger brewery because you've obviously got to consider your storage space. Like we can't have every single hop product under the sun, but I definitely had a few that I wanted to introduce. So we actually introduced a couple of new varieties, which don't know if I can say, but basically typical characteristics are like tropical fruits. So you're going for all those kind of like new world hop characters, and
we can play a game. We can play. You can do a yes or no, and we can say American or New Zealand.
All American. We'll just go with that.
I actually checked on the Max website, and it lists what hops are in there.
Oh, amazing!
Even down to what's in the whirlpool and what's dry hopped.
Bloody good. Okay.
Oh, go on then, David.
I'll have to find it. Hang on.
It's all right. There's Eldorado.
Yeah.
Citra, Mosaic, and I think that's it. There might be one other, but I think it's those. But they whirlpool, and then we dry hop with those. That combination too. Yeah. And the malt grist is light crystal rolled wheat, but we're transitioning to malted wheat, and that's probably about it. Oh.
And what do you on a yeast front? What do you like? You can use any yeast you want, or that you sort of have to stick with a house yeast, or what?
That's a really good question because I tried a bunch of different yeasts because I wanted to get the fruit characteristic from them as well. I found a good product from, I think it was from White Labs and stuff, but because of their I think their pack formats are like small volume liquid yeast, so it's got a really short shelf life. It's really expensive, and then we couldn't keep up with the supply, right? So we basically use the in-house yeast that we propagate here at the Pride, which still is a pretty good yeast, but you just don't get as many esters from it as probably would have liked for the Max. But yeah. Cool.
So when you're doing when you do a run of these, like a run for the apparition, what size batch is that then?
It's about 500 hex work there. So I think our minimum brew size is maybe around a 360 or 365, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah, it's about, I think 360 is minimum. Most things are about 500 hex. I think the actual brew house is designed for 550 hex. You can get down to 360, but then sometimes we do double batches as well. So, you know, if we did a double batch of apparition, we'd be making, what, 80,000 litres at a time?
Yeah. So,
Yeah, so we're talking petrol tankers sort of volume here.
Yeah.
I don't even know what a petrol tanker is these days. But,
I was thinking that. So yeah.
It's 27,000 litres.
Is a petrol tanker.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that kind of puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Petrol tankers then, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I could talk about the dry hopping process for this if you like. I mean,
it'd be interesting.
Yeah, because there's obviously a bunch of different. So one of the key things that came out obviously with a lot of hazies was the biotransformation. So dry hopping warmer would encourage a lot of these different products to basically form when the yeast is still slightly active and interacting with all the hop oils and such from the dry hopping, obviously. So with apparition, we dry hop it warmer than our other beers, and we cold stabilize it slightly warmer as well. So we're not going to have any sort of.
So how many days into the ferment are you dry hopping then?
Oh, I'm just trying to remember. Dave, do you remember this? I'm sorry, I wrote it so long ago and I haven't had a look, but I think I said 5 to 7 days. So you're pretty much towards the end of fermentation. AE's dropped out as much as you're going to get, and then but it's still warm, so you don't drop it down to drop the yeast out yet. You dry hop it at the end of its attenuation, basically.
Right.
So I think that's around the 5 to 6 days, maybe.
So it's pretty much finished. It's finished fermenting, but we just don't cool it to drop all the yeast out.
Yeah.
So the yeast still floating around. It hasn't settled.
Yeah.
We learned a trick from Kelly Ryan the other day. He adds CO2 to recirc to actually to make the
just rouses
the yeast.
Yeah. So these, we isomix it, which is not with CO2, but it's recirculating it, right? With we don't use the IMXDA, Dave, just the isomix.
Is your kettle under partial pressure or ambient? Like do you boil under a reduced pressure, or are you boiling it, atmosphere?
Atmosphere.
Like Dunedin and stuff like that are all like partial pressure systems, which is interesting for well pooling.
No, atmospheric, as Dave said. Yeah. Just trying to think. But yeah, so I was going to say that's pretty much the dry hopping process. Also, that took a lot of R&D. So I don't know if anyone else has a hazy that I don't care to talk about. But yeah, nutting out all the different, all the things that you want to put in a hazy versus the site constraints and cost constraints, or various different things that were coming into play as well. So yeah, it definitely shapes the beer a bit, which is interesting as well.
So, do you? What's your opinion on hazies then? Do you love them or hate them, or do you don't mind making them, or you hate making them? Or?
I love making them, probably more than I like drinking them.
Nice answer.
Because I like them, but I think there's such a great variety within the market, so I kind of find one or two that I love, and you want to try a few more and you have a bad experience, then you kind of get put off them for a while. But making them so much fun. Like, you've got all these great different yeasts out there and hops that you can try, and you always get these, you can create something pretty cool. So I quite like that.
Are you going product, especially for what line focus, product stability is pretty important. I mean, how are you finding product stability on the hazies? I mean, do you pasteurize them along with the other product, or are they unpasteurized?
No, pasteurized, yeah. So they're all pasteurized. I mean, in terms of flavor stability, the hops, the fact that this is only in cans helps a lot, because things are so much better, so much more shelf stable in cans versus other ones, other products. other packaging. The haze, it's pretty stable. I'd say that's why we're going to malted wheat. It's a bit more of a stable haze long term. It seems to be holding up fine, but I mean, yeah, hops are going to degrade over time. Haze probably diminishes slowly over time, but then you start getting age-related haze anyway, so up for debate. And yeah, I mean, pasteurized fine,
Just
micro
on
fine.
the pasteurization, you pasteurize that in the can, so you run the cans through like a hot
No,
water bath?
no. Oh, sorry. Yes, we do. Yeah. So we pasteurize through a tunnel pasteurizer.
Okay. And what temperature is that pasteurized at?
It's a good question. I think
it's 60. I think the hot zone's about 60 degrees.
Yeah.
For how
60.
For how long?
It takes, there's about 8 or 9 zones in the pasteurizers, and it takes about an hour to go all the way through. But obviously that's heating up and then the hot zone and then cooling down as it goes out.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Can we say the PUs? Can we say the PUs, Dave? Because it's pretty much what.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they all kind of vary. It's depending on different brands get different amount of PUs, but it's I mean they're really the pasteurizers have got a black box in them that is pretty clever, and it slows up, slows down, speeds up, adjusts water temperature to make sure they all sort of get evenly pasteurized. So
what does PU mean?
Pasteurization units.
Yeah. Oh, so that's basically like a time heat calculation.
Yeah, I think it's the number of minutes equivalent that it spends above 55 degrees or something like that, which kills so many number of bugs. Or
have a Google, because it's quite a simple calculation.
Cool.
But it basically, that's what the pasteurizer will be set at, right? So it's trying to target a certain amount of PUs, and it does that. It adjusts time based on the temp and all that kind of thing. So it's quite good.
So a lot of the death of hazies is they get mistreated by heat or not kept cold and that sort of thing. So once it leaves Lion, are there processes in place to make sure things stay in cold storage, or is that sort of out of your hands? Or
that's kind of out of our hands. I mean, it goes to a warehouse where it's stored, and then obviously shipped out to distributors or other warehouses and suppliers and things like that. We don't obviously cold ship, so we can't control that sort of part of the supply chain. It's pretty much
the only way we really control it is by doing less more often.
Frequency.
So basically you just don't you make it pretty much and ship it within the month, and then you hope that it doesn't get to anywhere near its use by date before people actually drink it.
I mean,
well, it's not so much the use by, but if it's been abused within that use by, isn't it?
So the quicker people drink it, the more abuse you can give it, and it'll taste the same as a longer time with less abuse, I guess. So the quicker you can get it into people's gullets, the better it's going to be, no matter how you treat it. I guess that's the only thing that we can control is the amount of time until it gets to people.
I mean, the other thing that we do obviously is, like, for every product that we put out, we have retention stock, so we keep and monitor it from a sensory perspective. We actually have weekly, bi-weekly profiles, so you're testing product that's actually in trade, seeing how it's performing.
So you get it back. You bring it.
I was going to say we can't test it exactly for what is in trade, but we basically have samples that we've stored, so in ambient room temperature, and then you taste it over a period of time of its shelf life. So
you don't throw it in your boot for a month or something.
I know, right? Let it drive around the car.
There's rep samples.
Sorry. They you test it like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and then we have trained tasters who are measuring or tasting it, writing comments, and it goes into what our system called Sense Check, which I think is a global system that we use. And you're able to actually get a number that pops out based on the profiler's comments, and points that they put towards you can rank it for flavor and age and taints or whatever you think. Basically,
it gets put into this database, and then it can spit out a number compared to what it should be performing, what you'd expect it to be performing for that time, for that age that the beer is. So you can see if it's on track, if it's aging as expected, or if it's not, and that will usually drive problem solving, figure out if there was a problem with that specific batch, and then that can obviously feed up to the trying to think, quality consumer team, who are basically speaking directly to customers who are ringing up with complaints. So if we see anything weird and sensory that we might want to say, hey, we're noticing something with this batch, we can often preempt things that might be happening in the marketplace, so we can keep an eye out, or we can preempt any sort of issue before it happens, most of the time anyway. Cool. So I don't know how long I've talked to. I've probably rambled, sorry. So the other couple of things, max seltzers. Obviously, seltzers are massive, so I've gone into a fermented base and produced max seltzers. So part of the team that was involved in that. There was also another exciting thing, obviously, because it's pretty new to, one, for Lion, a fermented base, and two, for New Zealand to get into seltzers, but then also fermented base seltzers, beer-based seltzers as well, which is quite a unique category of its own. And then
okay, well, what is the beer base then in these then?
It's a fermented. Trying to think what I can say. I think it's fine. Like it's a rice base, so it's fermented rice that we then or a fermented rice product that we then filter and add like flavors and stuff like that and dilute.
So it would turn into a pretty neutral sort of.
That's the plan, yeah. So there's lots of different ways to make seltzers, and basically to fit the beer definition, you've got to fit a few key things. So Australia and New Zealand have similar food codes for what a beer is, but slightly different. But New Zealand basically says the majority of carbohydrates have come from a grain or something to that effect. And so hence rice is where.
So what's the reason for keeping it beer based?
Is it for grocery channels? Yeah, so you can't sell RTDs in supermarkets, but you could sell this in supermarkets.
Yeah, right.
So that's
so
why
the easiest way to make it would be sugar and yeast and water.
Oh,
yeah.
But then you can't sell it in the supermarket, which is
or ethanol from Fonterra.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Ethanol, water, you get the cleanest, most neutral base, but the downside is that you're limiting your channels for distribution. So
that's how these all started, because especially in the US, they've got a multi-tax regime that for alcohol that beer's pretty liberal and pretty broad, well, low in terms of your tax on product.
Yeah. There's obviously a few other things. You can have BUs in this, so or you can have a hop extract. So I think we actually have a hop extract in it. And yeah, I think
so. There's no barley in this, so it's not an adjunct like a barley rice blend. It's pure rice, base.
No, it's rice.
Or is there a barley component?
It's no barley, rice and sucrose, and then it's just obviously processed.
Cool.
Yeah, processed rice rather than actual rice. We don't have a rice cooker.
Do you have the enzymes for that? Or are you adding enzymes
That's a good point. We don't actually add enzymes because we have our own internal laws around, like line rules and guidelines around when we can and can't use enzymes in the process. So we don't have enzymes in this product. But I mean, the rice syrup that we buy in has been modified to the point where it's basically produced the raw product ready for the yeast to consume.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah. And
the 5% was that the 5% was chosen for a reason?
5% ABV.
Yeah.
Yeah, marketing just have these ways about I mean, they basically decide the ABV, the brand name, the flavors, the style of the look and the feel of the product and all that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Any challenges in sort of fermenting a full rice product? I mean, like that, that's got to be quite different in terms of yeast metabolism and things like that. Are there any things that sort of when you're getting into high adjunct or 100%? What?
Yeah, definitely. Yep. So you've got to think. I mean, the main thing is the yeast nutrition, because high adjunct doesn't have a lot of amino acids for the yeast to consume and to metabolize the way that they would
use
normally.
your dead yeast from your other processes.
Well, that's the thing, is that you can actually dead yeast products that are approved to go into the food, into brews where you can actually get all the nutritional requirements for your yeast. But you do have, it mostly comes down to just selecting your yeast really carefully, because you can get ones that have high or low demand for amino acids, right? So you can, and you can get ones that produce neutral aromas or high H2S or high fruit ester kind of aromas and stuff like that. So if you just select your yeast and your nutrient regime and ferment temperature and stuff, if you control these, you can get a really neutral ferment. It just takes a while to trial and error specifically how you do that.
So you're dosing it sort of with like the fan additives and things like that, or other bits and pieces, or you're going full hillbilly and going tomato paste?
No, I think we use just yeast, just yeast nutrients. So I think we use a couple of those across different sites and things. So it does provide the target amino acids for the yeast that we use. Yeah.
Cool.
Fan, I should say. Yeah. Cool. I mean, the last one that I was involved in before I came over was Spate Summit Zero. So obviously Zero's in the market for a wee while. Heineken Zero and Lions obviously launched Spate Summit Zero recently. We've also got a couple, I think the James Squire Zeros come out as well, which is obviously the Australian version, which I helped to create as well. And yeah, so Zero is a whole other world, a whole other, of R&D and so much to think about in terms of how you make it and flavor profile and all that kind of stuff. So that was another incredibly challenging but super interesting.
So are you fermenting a alcoholic product and then removing the alcohol, or are you using some of these new
I don't know if I can say
new yeasts that don't actually make alcohol?
I don't know if I can actually say, but yeah, there are a bunch of different ways to make it, essentially. I'm just trying to think.
The new yeast strains that have come out, they're a very recent thing, and I think you did this a little while ago, so that might answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, there are a lot of different technologies to use. So there's spinning comb, there's thermal dealkalization, there is RO, so reverse osmosis, and you can abort the fermentation, so you can have the yeast in contact for the work for a short period of time, then dilute the product to within your target ABV requirements, and then like you said, you've also got the yeast strains that don't actually produce a lot of naturally just don't produce a lot of alcohol. And so
you did this on your wee pilot plant then?
No, so we partnered with a company that had a pilot version of the kit that we wanted to, and then we basically just went through the process of trial and error and working with different suppliers to build the product.
But you wouldn't be doing these at the squillion hectoliter scale, would you?
No. But it is a limiting factor with this project, was that to be able to develop this pilot stage, because the other thing was a lot of the bulk of this work was done during COVID. So COVID hit us towards the end of last year, and we were doing a lot of this work remotely. So that had its own complications as well. Yeah.
but yeah.
How much of what you do? So I assume you guys have like a huge marketing team and that's kind of dictating and telling you guys constantly, this is what the market wants, is what you guys need to do. I mean, how much of that determines what your R&D and what products you develop? Like I can see the seltzers. For me, that's just strictly a marketing thing.
Yeah.
But like the hazy beer that you made, how much of that was the market? How much of it was somebody, yourself making a nice beer?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a good point. So, especially with the Max team, so we obviously have different teams, different marketing teams behind different brands. So with Speight's and things like that, you can imagine they've got a very clear idea of what the Speight's image looks like and who the consumer is. And so there's different limitations with that. Max is a really good brand to play with, right? So you've got, like I can make a bunch of different beers and a festival will be coming up, for example, like if Gabs, and I can just say to the marketing team, hey, I really like this, I want to make this, or Gabs. And so you do get a lot more freedom and flexibility with Max because the brand kind of demands it and the consumer kind of demands it a bit more. So I think that it just depends on the brand and probably the relationship with the marketing team. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, because I remember I have a bit of a food science background. I remember like in the ice cream industry, you constantly have these companies, they look at what the other company was doing.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, we need to do, and the marketing team would be given these briefs to the development people, say, oh, you need to make this.
Yeah.
And we want to make it a 4-pack, a 5-pack, something like that. Do you get a lot of that? Kind of like seeing what other people are doing and trying to compete with it?
We do. And I reckon sometimes you can see a need for it and sometimes you don't. Like, I mean, this is purely my personal opinion, but like you want to be at the forefront for a lot of things anyway, especially in a competitive market. So if we're constantly copying what the competitor's doing, it's not great. But looking, like I said, the insights team are looking to trends globally, and so you can kind of see things that that will come New Zealand's way. It'll be trending soon, and then you get to
Chris Nelson will pipe up in a minute and say bring back the brown.
What, light and brown?
No, brown ale.
Oh, brown ale.
It's the new hazy.
Just some feedback for your marketing team on this 10-pack of cans. I really like that. Just the whole shape and the size, and it works well for me.
Good. Thank you. Was it for the seltzers?
No, hell no. I don't buy seltzers.
Yeah.
This is for your birthday. I bought the birthday pack.
Oh yeah, it's good, eh?
Bought 2 of them actually.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is we don't actually have a machine that can recognize the cans and pack 2 of each into a box.
Yes, we have to.
Does it manually?
Yep, it's contract packed, so I don't know who does it or where it goes, but it's the same when they do those the Speight's that you can get with your name on every now and then. They're all individually stickered and boxed.
Great marketing ideas, but just really difficult.
That's why they don't last all that long. Because people doing it by hand don't tend to like doing too many, or it gets expensive. One of the two, I'm not sure, but
cool.
That's good. You're helping the unemployment rate. Awesome.
Yeah.
I'll stop sharing now because I was going to say I'm pretty much done. I was just going to say one of the cool things is with my job, you get to work with a lot of different breweries within the LAN network, and then obviously that means you get to design recipes for all different shapes and sizes and makes of different kits, and challenging, but it's really, really cool because you obviously get to see such an amazing array of like plant and how everything works and how it can work together. And
tell us a little bit of the stint you did out at so the hangar shot there. What's it called?
Creatures. Yeah. So the previous head brewer was resigning to retire. I just got the opportunity to go out there and spend a bit of time just making some brews, doing the handover basically for picking everything up off the old brewer Udo and then handing on to the new brewer Joanna Upton.
So what size plant have you got at Little Creatures out there?
Oh, I think it's 1,200 litres, so 12 hex.
So small in your world.
Yeah, very small. But it's a really cool kit. It's really nice. It's predominantly automated. I think there's a few bits and pieces here and there that you don't need, that aren't automated and stuff like that. But in terms of different breweries that have been designed, it was a good little brewery to.
And did you do some seasonal things or personal favourite while you were there?
Yeah, so I mean, they've obviously got their core range. So Barnstormer, which is their hazy, is really popular. They sell it a bunch of different establishments just through keg only. So you're doing probably, I think I was doing 2 Barnstormers a week. And then I did a couple of seasonal. One, I just kept it real simple, and I just did a Citra Pale Ale. Pretty much because when I was at Castles, there's a Citra Pale Ale, and I loved it. So I tried to make my own spin on it. And then we did a couple of fruit sours. I think this was when I was transitioning over or handing over to Joe. So there was an apricot and peach sour, the Citra Pale Ale. But yeah, that's another great role because they try and, I mean, obviously not in COVID times, but usually you get one new seasonal a month, I think was the target. So you get to really have a lot of free range with recipes. Yeah.
So when you were doing the fruit beers, what form were you getting your fruit in?
You can get it in, I think we got it in puree. So we were doing I'm trying to remember, I think it was like a Goza style base, and then we had fruit puree that we would add maybe day 2 or 3 in the fermentation process. So you're actually fermenting out the majority of the fruit, the fructose or the sugars. Yeah. So
there's no worry about oxygen intake when that's added at 2 days in or anything?
Yeah, it's added pretty quickly. I can't remember the exact days, but it's added quite early, so there's not a major risk to oxygenation. There's and then there's no sort of not a huge amount of residual sugars that we left over, because obviously with a brewery at that scale, we're not pasteurizing because there's no capability to. So you need to make sure that your residual sugars are quite low.
And are you adding salt to your guys?
Yes, yeah. So I did for the sourpuss, and we probably did do for the sour ale, but I just can't remember the base recipe for that one. I just remember the fruit.
Yeah, because that whole Little Creatures thing would be an abandoned hangar like it was for quite some time at the moment.
Oh, I know. I need to catch up with Jo because I feel for her, because it's such a great gig, and I'm sure like she would have been quite busy.
Because there's no canning or bottling or anything because it's keg only, right?
Unless they got crafty canners out, but I would imagine crafty canners would be in high demand as soon as we got the level 4 announcement, so people could actually figure out what to do with their products. But yeah, there's no canning, just kegging, and obviously with no pasteurization, all their kegs have quite a short shelf life. So yeah, I mean, last time round, albeit it was a shorter period of time, they were doing takeaways and stuff, as most breweries had figured out that's the way to get it out the door.
Right.
But I haven't caught up with Jo recently, so for what they're up to. But yeah. Cool.
Isha, are you making Little Creatures Pale Ale at Whenuapai to distribute around New Zealand, or is that coming from Australia?
It's coming from Australia, yeah. We're the ones that we're doing at Little Creatures, I think just because it's a small kit and there is only one brewer, so you're quite limited in what you can and can't do there. And we definitely wouldn't be able to keep up with the demand from that, Little Creatures Pale Ale. So the probably the main brands like the IPA, the Pale Ale, Rogers, I think as well. I think it's a Session IPA or something. They come from Australia, but then if you go to Hobsonville, it'll be all the rest of the taps basically are all the one-offs that Jo will come up with.
Is a White Rabbit Belgian ale as well, I think.
Yeah, that one.
Is that Australia? Is that Australia, made in Australia as well?
Yeah, that's for sure. Just trying to think of what else there is, but there's that you can usually tell if it's a Little Creatures Hobsonville, because they try and keep the aviation theme going with all the beer names. So a lot of the beer names that a lot of the beers that are made at Hobsonville always have aviation inspired themes. But yeah, cool. Do you guys have any more questions on?
No, that's brilliant. Hey, thank you very much for sharing your time with us.
I mean, that's good. Sorry, taking an hour.
No, that's perfect. It's we go on for 2.5 hours with some of these sessions, so you're getting off lightly. So because Alyssa and David were meant to come along. This lockdown we're in now, it was in 2 days' time before when this started. That's when you guys were actually going to come along and see you in person. So it's good to actually catch up with you in the virtual, and maybe we should organise a trip out to Hobsonville and meet out there and do a real person thing when that all works again.
Yeah, get Joe to show us around.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, that'd be a great little trip.
Perfect.
Hey, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Does she work on weekends, Joe?
I'm sure she does, but we won't put her through that. We might convince her. Cool. Well, nice to meet you guys, and hopefully I'll see you in person sometime soon.
Cool. Hey, thanks so much, Alyssa.
Cheers, Alyssa.
No worries, guys.
Thank you.
Oh, we'll hand over to David.
Cool. Well, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, mine's a bit boring after Alyssa's, but that's right. I'll so a bit of my background. I didn't go to university, and I don't have a food science degree, and I haven't worked at a brewery before this one. I'm actually an industrial electrician and control tech. And before I joined Lion 5 years ago, I'd never worked at a brewery.
So were you home brewing before that then, or
I've been home brewing, well, on and off since the dodgy old plastic days when I was 20. And then that was pretty shit, so I gave it up for quite a while. And then I've probably been doing all grain for over 10 years now. So probably 5 years before I joined Lion. So I joined as an electrician and sort of worked in engineering, and then about 3 years ago, chance came up to actually go and sort of be a team leader over in brewing. So I went and did that just so I could learn more about brewing, really, because it was interesting. So that's kind of my story. So I've got a bit of a slideshow. So what I was going to do is just sort of go through a bit more of the sort of the site side of things and what sort of size and scale things are. So once again, any questions, just yell out. I'll hide everyone's faces so I can see what I'm doing. But yeah, any questions? It's just a brief overview. If you've got any questions about the gear or the process or anything as we go through, just yell out. So that's obviously, this was, I think, was the original concept drawing of the buildings. So as we go through, so that's the lauder tun there, mash tun and kettle. Obviously the lauder tun's quite shallow and quite a large diameter. So obviously it used to be at Khyber Pass, and they ran out of room, and it was an expensive piece of land, so they actually bought out where they are at East Tamaki. Much bigger site. I believe it was something like $300 million development or something when they built it. Massive warehouse, massive plant, and the idea being that it's pretty future-proofed. So sort of size-wise, if we ran 24/7, we'd make 180 million litres of beer a year. Your RTDs do wine there, non-alcs and cider as well. So now the exciting part, so the shiny bit. So this is the brew house, which we were looking in the front window of that concept drawing. It just gives you an idea of scale. That's a person standing looking in the window there. So the brew size is 55,000 litres, which is high gravity as well. So that works out to be quite a bit more. once it's diluted down to cell strength. So it's about 166,000 of bottles of Steinlager per brew. And we do somewhere between 8 to 10 brews per 24 hours when we're brewing. Yeah, smallest brew possible's 36,000 litres. And that's one of the limitations we have. It was built as a large brew, high throughput brewery. And now the expectation is you can do one-offs, you can do small brews. You know, some of the brews, the demand isn't a full brew, and a lot of it ends up expiring and being dumped. So a big challenge for the site is being able to do multiple small brews, which it was never designed to do.
So David, 3,360, that's 3,600 liters, is that right? The smallest brew?
No, 36,000. So it's weird. I'd never seen it anywhere before I came to the brewery that you measure things in 100 liters, hectoliters.
That's very common in Germany. They use that all the time.
Yeah, that must be historically where it comes from. So basically you put 2 zeros on the end. So yeah,
and you talked about the high gravity brew. So what sort of hydrometer reading you're looking at that brew then?
So 15, some are up around sort of 10, 6, somewhere around there, just over here, 1060, 1070.
Oh, so it's not high then.
No, it's not high. It's about it's like it's under 7%.
Right.
So it's not massive. You can push it higher with different yeasts, but your limitation tends to be your yeast when you get up around those percentages.
But then you attenuate more and you end up with less residual sugars, though.
You do, yeah. So there's from a quality point of view, high gravity brewing isn't fantastic. You know, so but a lot of the anything that's dry hopped or anything like that is not super high gravity because of hop utilization and, you know, the general dilution and loss of sort of hops and all the expensive stuff you put in it.
Right.
So they're kind of range. Some stuff's higher gravity, some stuff's, you know, less gravity down towards cell strength, just depending on what stuff is.
Is the plant kind of set up like that to make like one standard like a base beer, and then you move it into different tanks and you do different processes with it to make it a Steinlager, make it a Corona, or make a... Yeah,
that's a lot of how these brew houses were designed. Yeah, just for massive long runs of very similar stuff, which in Australia still suits them because they have, you know, they basically have a brew house and that makes, you know, 1 brand of beer, 2 brands of beer. And then if they put another brew house beside it, they can make 4 brands of beer quite happily. You know, there's a lot because we get run out of Australia. There's a lot of comparisons that get made between us and them. But you know, they make something like 4 or 5 brands, whereas we make something like 30.
So how was something like Panhead Supercharger made then?
So very similar. So basically, it runs through. You know, it's no secret we're making it now. It just runs through as a normal brew.
But at huge scale, I mean, it must have been a huge scale up from what they were doing it at. Oh yeah. It took like to bring a beer from craft to this brewery here. The technical brewers, they'll come up with what they think will be similar, and then they'll do and the problem is you do an emulation brew, which will quite possibly go down the drain, and for that you're talking, you know, 36,000 litres. Of potentially non-saleable beer, and it could go through 2 or 3 recipe changes before, you know, the brand holder's happy that it is the same beer. So that's where the actual size and scale works against you as well when you're trying to reproduce. So that's the. I've got a question here. Chris Nelson's asking is the high temp gravity watered down pre or post fermentation? Sorry, what was that? Is the high gravity water? Is it watered down pre or post fermentation?
Post. It's diluted as it's filtered. So it goes through high strength until it gets filtered and turned into bright beer.
What kind of filtering do you have?
Got that at the end. It's a crossflow microfilter. So I've got a slide on that sort of at the end. So I'll run through.
Yeah, we'll let you move on, and then
Yes,
we'll ask
sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No, that's fine.
Are the kettles at the Pride running in like you're running calendars? Are you like, are they internal or external calendar that you're running on those?
Internal. Yeah. So I'll just jump ahead. So there it is. Yeah. So there's the kettle.
Sure.
So it's actually an internal calendar. So what that means is you've got like this little, it's a bundle of steam tubes in the middle of your, how do I go back? Ooh, here we go. So there's a bunch of steam tubes in there, and the work basically gets taken out, and for a start it's pumped. So it gets taken out the bottom, pumped up through the heating tubes, and comes up and then circulates like that.
So you get thermal convection. Yeah.
Yep, and then as the thermal convection starts, the pump gets turned off, and it basically cycles through by itself.
So that's the primary thing that's going to limit your batch size in terms of what you need, the level you need to have at in order for that to function.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. You can't go below a certain level, and you can't go above a certain level. Otherwise, you're not going to get proper boiling.
So looking at that, there wouldn't Palmer's book about hot water aeration would all go out the water?
Yeah, it is. That's very interesting. It's that's what I thought, and I've never really.
Well, I think he's the only one who thinks it's real, isn't it?
Oh no, talk to me about it though. I mean, like,
yeah,
that's the curious. I mean, like, your oxygen solubility once your water gets over about 90 degrees is pretty much zero. So I mean, although you're getting high agitation at temperatures close to boiling, you've got no oxygen solubility, so it's not an issue. And it depends on whether you're talking about sort of hot side aeration, which is more an issue of protein share, or you're talking hot side oxidation, which is a different thing entirely.
Yeah. Oh, yep. So there we go. So the silos, 6 large silos, 160,000 tons of lager malt each. And then we got some smaller ones. So that truck there, they deliver 120 ton, I think they're about 120 ton truck and trailer. And during peak season, we'll have 3 of those a day showing up at the Pride.
That's all Malt Europe, is it?
That's all Malt Europe. Yep. So we do get some other stuff from different people, but our main lager malt, which I think is the same for everyone in the country, comes from Malt Europe, down in Martin.
Do you get the pale ale malt as well, or just the Pilsner malt?
Mainly all lager. Yeah, lager Pilsner. They Malt Europe will tell you it's pretty much the same malt.
Right.
So it's basically all lager malt. We've got some crystal malt that we use. And then we've got 4 smaller silos for specialty malts. So we use a lot of dark chocolate. Well, not a lot, but we use some dark chocolate for colour, and then other sort of little bits and pieces.
So for like your more sort of ale-bodied beers and things like that, you'd use Pilsner and then sort of like just tint it with another sort of specialty malt or something, would you? In order to get flavour profile, or?
Yeah. That's pretty much it. Most stuff's done with lager and a bit of crystal. And then dark chocolate just to trim for a bit of flavour and a bit of colour. Pretty standard. There's our mill. So we've got a six roller mill, which can do 10 tons, can mill 10 tons an hour, which is pretty much one brew. So it's continuous cycle as you sort of mill it down, and then so the limiting factor in the whole brew house is the lauter ton. So you sort of do a mash, transfer it over, then you wait, mill, and then mash in again, and then sort of follow it all through. And that's just the mash ton. It's got steam jackets so you can heat it up. All just comes in the top. It's got a water mixer, dynamic water mixer there, so it just feeds the water in as the malt comes down. And then it's got a small agitator in the bottom that just mixes it all as well.
So I suppose the limiting factor in smaller breweries is usually the number of bright tanks, but your limiting factor is the lauter ton.
Speed wise, it's the lauter ton.
Yeah.
We do run into tank constraints during busy times as well.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, the actual number of brews we can put through the brew house is limited by the speed of the lauter ton. Which
because you 24/7 operation, yeah.
24/5.
24/5.
Right. Yes. So during peak season, which is pretty much now onwards, we'll be brewing from 10 o'clock Sunday night, and we'll brew right through till Friday late afternoon. Generally don't run extra shifts in the brew house. They can normally keep up. But we do have the challenge that as we do more low carb, that takes a lot longer to go through. So the rise of low carb beer actually hamstrings us and makes our life a lot more difficult.
Oh, what's the reasoning behind that?
Because you're trying to break down so much of the sugar, it just takes longer. So it meshes for longer, which means everything's softer, so it doesn't lauter as easy because your bed's not this very nice crisp husks. It's actually mushy bloody cornflakes.
Right.
Sparge.
Yeah. So it takes a lot longer to lauter. The runoffs are really slow. It sits in the mash tun for a lot longer as well. So that, I think it must be pretty close to double the time to do a brew of low carb as it is to do anything else.
Wow.
So the more and more of that you get through, the less and less brews you can actually put through.
David, just on the milling, just kind of bring that down to a small home brewer. Do you know what moisture do you condition the grains? Do you kind of wet them a bit?
We dry mill. The old plant at Kaiba Pass had a wet mill. They went to dry on this one, and the moisture content in the malt is normally around about 4% or under, just under 4%, I think.
Okay. And do you know if the mills, the rollers, do you know if are they like a differential? I mean, do you know what type of rollers they are?
So they're fluted rollers.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's 3 sets. So the first one's basically designed just to break the husk. The second set actually is designed to pull the husk off and mill part of the grain. Then the third one basically turns it to flour. So there's a certain percent. I think it's about 10. I'm potentially making it up, but I think it's around about 10% is pretty much like flour, and then you have sort of a few more percent of the higher grades just to get your bed done as well.
Yeah, so that's a lot more powdery than you do in a home brew scale, I guess.
Definitely, yep, a lot more powdery, just to get the extract out. It's all measured on extract recovery, all our targets and stuff like that. So
if we're doing the multi-step crack, you're still going to end up with a reasonable amount of retained husk, or it's kind of a different process to a home brew mill.
Yeah, so you sort of relying on keeping the husk, but then what you don't have is husk. You want it ground down a lot more finer.
So the husk
pretty cool. So the husk semi-intact, and then the rest is like boom.
Yeah. So it has sort of 3 sets of almost sieves in there. So it kind of goes through the first one, and then the husks sit on top, and they kind of roll off the side, and then that falls through, and then that gets ground, and then some more goes off the side of a different size. Then it hits
so that husk still ends up in the mash, though.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, so it's not discarded. It becomes part of the filter bed.
Yeah.
You try to lauter flour.
Yeah, it wouldn't be fun.
That's really like a almost. I mean, that's like the beginning of the flour mill. That's the way it kind of starts. When you kind of removing the outer, and then just kind of go down and you sieve out what you want, and you put the rest of it through another roller mill.
It's like,
okay, cool.
Have any of you guys seen the new grain? The new SS Brewtech mill. That I think there's a few floating around New Zealand. They're big rollers compared to the sort of things. I mean, like all the small homebrew mills are all small rollers, and they put a wicked knurling on them to compensate for the fact that they're very small rollers. So they basically tear the living shit out of the grain. So that's why you get so much husk astringency and stuff like that. Most of the big mills, that's based on big rollers that sort of, it's almost compression rather than and the fluting really is just to pull through the grains.
Yeah, I have seen they're like really narrow and quite large diameter, eh?
Yeah, real narrow, but running sort of like I think about 6 centimeter rollers in it. It's pretty cool.
Mm.
It's bloody expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, this here was in because I kind of plagiarized this a bit from another slideshow. I heard about these, but they don't have them anymore. When the thing was installed, they put these little vibrator things inside the mesh ton. In fact, that's the mounting for one of them there. And apparently they were little cylinders that used to hang in the mesh and they used to vibrate. And the idea behind it was some sort of patented thing from the manufacturer that it removes the oxygen from the mesh. So apparently they stopped working and they decided they didn't need them, so they took them out. But I thought that was just an interesting theory that, you know, a worldwide manufacturer has put something in there to get the oxygen out of the mesh. So that goes to your sort of hot side oxygenation, I guess.
That's a German translation, blue hanging things.
I don't know who wrote that.
Sorry.
I don't know who made the original slideshow, but yeah, blue hanging thing. You must have used to be able to look through the window and see them so people could see what they were.
But that sounds like snake oil. It really does.
It does, yeah. Yeah. Buy my mesh tank because I've got some blue hangy vibrating things in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was the main. I mean, like, you know, you guys would have heard of Charlie Bamford. That was the main thing that he was working on before he left Davis to go sort of semi-retire and go and get a sweet paying role at Sierra Nevada. Was the whole impact of not hot side aeration. That's sort of, it's pretty hard to get, but hot side oxidation. Because he's a pretty well respected. I mean, you know, Charlie's, not many people would argue against Charlie. And, you know, it was the fact that, you know, you got a reasonable high reactivity at mash temperatures, but also a reasonable oxygen solubility. And he was ex-Fuller's, and that's why when he went to America and everything else like that, he was noticing, like, you know, a stripped malt character in a lot of their beers. And so he was sort of one of the guys that really started that.
Probably more due to rice.
Nah, there's a bit more to it than that. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. But I know I wouldn't call hot side oxidation witchcraft at all. I think aeration, hot side aeration is, but hot side oxidation, I would. But you guys have got such good process in terms of how you're doing a lot of stuff that, you know, probably less of an issue than for.
Yeah. So the Lauder, I guess the defining factor between homebrew and this is you've got rotating rakes that are designed to, they basically cut the bed and slightly lifted as well. So they're kind of.
Are they running continuous?
They do for a start, and then they'll stop as you're drawing off. They'll stop, and then if your runoff drops to a certain point, they'll go down, and they've got preset levels. They might go sort of halfway in and just do a couple of rotations just to free the bed up again.
Because there's sort of a homebrew thing about not stirring your mash, and it sounds like that's nonsense.
Yeah, they're kind of designed so they do admit that they make channels, but they don't go all the way down as well. I think if you get a really, really stuck mash where you're in the shit, which has happened, they go down to something like 5 or 10 mil off the bottom of the actual plate. So they can go all the way down, but generally you're not, you're only sort of halfway in if they do a couple of rotations. So, and then the water tends to even the bed back out again.
The bulk of your filter beds, the bottom might be the bottom 20% tops of your Lauder ton anyway.
Yeah. So so it just basically water and just works on water and water out. It matches the in with the out.
Oh, so it is recircing. Yeah.
So it recircs first. So it's got like turbidity measurement, cloud, haze measurement on it. So for a start, it'll recirc for I'm not sure how long it is, 10-15 minutes till it gets clear work, and then it'll start pumping it out.
What are you doing in volumetric measurement and things like your tons? What technology are you using for those?
That has got this really funny level sensor thing on it that looks at the liquid level I actually don't. I'm not 100% sure how it works, but it also measures. They use it to measure the. They don't actually measure the pressure across the bed on this lauder tun. It's actually done by the liquid level, and as the pump draws more, it sucks the level down. So it's not a true level. It's almost more like a pressure measurement.
Right, so it's doing like hydrostatic pressure sensor or something.
Hydrostatic pressure rather than level itself. So there's the kettle. So you got your calandria. So it's pretty well controlled. 4% evaporation. It's almost a set point. You can tell it basically how much evaporation you want, but 4% is what's aimed for. Heat recovery. So with being a relatively new brew house, it's very energy efficient. So all of the vapor and heat that comes off that is used to heat hot water, which is used elsewhere to heat things up as well. So dosing of hops, we've got a automatic hop dosing, so it comes out of silos, basically gets powdered up, put in a tank, mixed with some water, and then just flushed into the kettle at different points.
Do you use a pretty stock standard bittering hop, Dave, or do you vary it based on brews?
It's pretty much standard. In fact, pretty much everything's got the same brewing hop in it, which is a well-known one that's used for Steinlager.
Good hop.
So most of them are the same. So yeast. So we got five yeast strains, 3 of which are our house strains, and 2 come from Europe, which is Beeks and Stella. So they send us slants every few months, and we repropagate from there. I think their yeast we only use 6 times before we reprop it, but our house yeast strains we use 10 times before we propagate again. It's all done on site, all done from slants.
Have you ever stuck any home in your top pocket and got a home brew with it?
I have, because we throw away so much yeast, it's not funny. So we've got, it goes to 2 places. It goes to Sanitarium to make Marmite. They take yeast from us and DV, blend it together, and the rest goes for animal food. But we're making 6 times as much yeast as we put in. So we've just continually got lots and lots of yeast. That's one thing that we're not short of. So yeah.
What's nice is your propagation system. Your propagation system is going to be bigger than most bloody breweries.
Yeah, well, that's a 60 hectoliter. So it goes. So we do it all the way up. That tank. The tank in the middle is where it actually hits the plant. So we do it up to 20 liters in the plant in the lab, and then that tank there I think is a 60-liter tank, which is the first one it goes into, and then
it drops into the 5,000.
So what's that? That's a 60 hectoliters. That's a 6,000-liter tank.
Yeah, not many craft breweries have a 60,000 liter for.
No, and that's just to make the first batch
yeast.
Yeah.
And what's the grist or what are you using for your growing medium? Just straight lager water,
Yep.
is it?
So as it comes to this stage, we just basically siphon off some of a brew that goes past and put it in the tank, and use that. So it depends on which yeast we're propping up as to which brand it comes off. Obviously, use the same brand.
So where you can have basically two varieties of yeast on tap at a particular time. You'll propagate up 2 different strains, or
no, they can only do 1 at a time. So one of them, so that tank on the left is basically the wort that we siphon off a brew.
Okay.
So we siphon that off, and then we do that, and then that goes into there with that wort, and then away it goes. So it only takes about I think it's about a week. It's 48 hours per step up. So it doesn't take long. And then they obviously offset that so that you're not having to prop 2 at once.
So you're going from 60,000.
Yeah.
In 2 days, it's enough.
Well, just 6,000. So.
Oh, sorry, 6,000.
Yeah.
And that's enough to pitch.
Yeah. So the first brew it always gets it never gets used wholly to make its parent brew, because it can, obviously being a prop brew, it can have, it might not be truly true to type because the yeast has been under a fair amount of stress.
Okay, so you do a generational blend, like take some off of from a pre, and cool.
Yeah, and then basically you've got 10 lots, 10 lots that you can take off and use, and then before you reprop again.
Oh, okay, so you'll take off a chunk each time and reblend it in, and sort of. How does that manage? So
we keep our generation separate from once they go in and come out the first time.
Right.
Then they don't get mixed again. In a brew, so we keep them totally separate.
Cool.
But I think possibly we'd have 2 generations going at once at some stages when we've propped one up but the other one hasn't finished yet. But we've got people that look after all of that and do the yeast planning and what goes into which brews and what comes out and what gets used and all that sort of stuff. So that's,
I mean, at your scale, that's almost it's a discipline in itself, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it is. It's it needs to be managed by a person, and it is.
So why are there 5 different strains? So you got a couple. Well, you got 2 international lagers.
Yeah.
But the rest of it are all ale yeasts, right?
The rest are all. Yeah, I mean they're lager ale yeast. They're pretty much interchangeable, I think, at this sort of scale.
But why 5 different types? So, I mean, what characteristic would you get from one that you don't for another, for example?
So the three house blends. One is the original Lion way back, year dot one. Another one was introduced, I don't know when, but I think that was the Australian one that got brought over. And then we've got a third one just for some of the other slightly different ones we do. So they all have slightly different characters. One's a bit more estery. One is quite neutral but tends to be quite sulphury. And yeah, the other one's slightly different again. That's sort of in the middle somewhere. But yeah, sulphur used to be quite a sought after character.
Sulphur.
Yeah, because it acts as a preservative.
Right.
So you want some in there, but you don't want too much in there. So yeah, that's and I mean it's the same you see with homebrew lager yeast on a small scale as well. The lager yeast that you do slower are quite sulphury quite often. So it is a general trait, I think, of lager yeast. But yeah, it is.
I think that's quite a nice character too. I mean, at low levels, a little bit of sulphur can give a bit of a crispness, a vibrancy, a slight minerality to a beer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's when we get sort of eggy that you got a problem.
Yeah, and it does help with shelf life, so that's why they like a bit of it around as well.
That's probably one thing, Dave, that I mean, especially at the macro brew level. I mean, you guys are just so good in terms of beer stability compared to craft and everything, because I mean, you've got such I suppose, a diverse distribution channel, so much of which is beyond your control. I mean, there's any things that you can share with the group that sort of sit in terms of what you do and how you target or aim for beer stability, or stuff that you'll do in the brew process that's different to homebrew? I don't know if that's your wheelhouse, or it might be more Alyssa's, but that's one thing I really noticed the difference between the 2 disciplines.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is down to the filtration and just getting everything out. So we've got 2 centrifuges as well. We centrifuge between fermenter and cold storage, and then we centrifuge again before we filter. And that really is just to remove all of those sort of the proteins and you try not to take out the sort of the head retention proteins, but a lot of the proteins and polyphenols that do age and stale your beer. you tend to try and get those out. And the crystal clear beer not only is crystal clear because it looks nice, but it's crystal clear because it's going to last a lot better as well. And the other thing is oxygen, just keeping oxygen out as much as possible. That's really a key, is keeping the oxygen out, because even if you take almost everything out that's gonna stale your beer, if you fill it full of oxygen, it'll find it. So that really is the big thing, is keeping oxygen out. Cool. So there's the tank farm. So we've got, so down there, that's basically all of our, that's the malt, but there's so basically fermenters. So we've got 22 fermenters, 28 maturation tanks, 14 bright beer tanks. And just after I started, they commissioned the 6 uni tanks, which are the ones down here. So they were done in response to dry hop beers, basically. I think from the stories I've heard, when they first started doing dry hop beers, they were basically walking up the top of the vessels, opening the hatch and putting hops in, which obviously when you're experimenting with something's fine, but not long term. So so they put these little tanks in here, which are single brew and double brew. So those ones are 600, so 60,000 litres. And the ones at the back are 120,000 litres, so you can put 2 brews in there. And they're connected to the dry hopping system, so it's all done automatically from inside. So yeah, fermentation anything from 5 days to 2 weeks, depending on the yeast strain. And then,
I don't know if it's me, but I'm imagining a bit of tubing that's like 8 mil, and then each hop goes down in a little bullet train to the dry hopping.
That's it right there. So when we started doing dry hopping, and Alyssa kind of alluded to this too, the whole plant is designed to make crystal clear beer. And now all of a sudden you want to keep the haze in the beer, which is not something it's designed for. So that's why they've got the new tanks. This is the dry hopping system, so it's still quite manual. So I mean, all the hops still come in 20 kilo boxes. Sometimes they're in 10 kilo bags, sometimes they're in 5 kilo bags. They all get manually open and put into this tank here.
Are you recirculating the beer through that tank? Is it like or are you using gas to push it in? Which kind of method?
It goes into a loop. So you've got basically a loop that runs around from the tank along through a line and back into the tank.
Right, so you're doing a recirc.
Yeah, and this is pumped into it, so this gets filled up. Usually use water with it, and then just pump it. There's a pump under there, and it pumps out into the line.
Okay, so you hydrate the hops and then pump the hot slurry into the. Okay,
yep.
Cool.
Then,
so it's not a recirculating beer through the. Okay,
no,
cool.
no, it's not.
Yeah,
one
about
of those.
4 or 5 ways you can do it. I was just curious.
Yeah, I'm sure ours is the best way, but it works.
Yeah.
It's but it is still quite a manual process, and yeah, you have some beers where you put in upwards of half a ton of dry hops in for a couple of brews.
Oh, that's one part we skipped there, Dave.
Yep.
Was water treatment at the beginning of the whole process.
Yep. So I didn't actually put a slide on that. So our water comes in and is basically stripped of everything. We've got carbon filters, sand filters, everything like that.
You demineralize?
Not the brewing beer, no. I'd say when the carbon filter will take the chlorine out. Yeah, no, I don't think we do demineralize.
That won't strip ions, but yeah.
No,
Didn't think you did, but yeah.
No, and then obviously no, we don't bother. That's processed water down this end. So this actually for the dry hopping it'll be deaerated water as well, so all the oxygen stripped out. But then we do add a few bits and pieces back into the actual water in the mash and the mash and the sparge.
Is that brew specific or is that a generic thing?
It is slightly brew specific. Just trying to think. Yeah, I mean, there's different. It's pretty much I can't remember exactly what it is. Might be calcium chloride or something that we put in, and something else. I mean, there's slightly different levels for different brews, but it's all pretty reasonably generic. So there is water treatment that gets done, and then most things we add a bit of zinc to as well for yeast health as it comes out to the fermenter. So that gets added.
Some of the beers have sucrose added.
They do add some sucrose. None of the craft beers get sucrose, and it's just added in as it gets added in as it's cooled. Comes out of the whirlpool and just gets injected in.
What about Steinlager?
I can't really say. I'll just say that it's not in any of the craft beers.
Oh, okay.
The Max beers have always been marketed as I think all natural ingredients. I mean, yeah, they've kind of got the that whole naturally brewed and all that sort of stuff. So we don't add anything to that, but yeah, some of the mainstream beers have some adjuncts in them. Not a huge percent. It's not up at the 30% that I heard someone mention earlier, but they do get some added in, just for extract.
How much of that goes to flavor profile too? I mean, a lot of people bag it, but I mean, like, there are times that you actually really do want to have a little bit of. I mean, I think even on the craft brewing side, I think people will be surprised how often sucrose is actually, especially onto the bigger ABV beers. I mean, it's not it's not the evil little thing that many people you'd be drinking a lot more sucrose than you think you would be.
I'd say so. Yeah. No, I mean, it's not. I think if you go too high a percentage, it does start impacting flavour. Because it has been discussed in the past. I mean, everyone's looking to save money where they can, and it has been discussed before that you could add more adjunct. But I know that the older guys have basically said it's been set at a level where the flavour doesn't get impacted. They've obviously done a lot of in the early days a lot of sensory trials and testing and stuff. So.
What are some of the things, Dave, that you actually have to declare on the label? Like I've never seen sucrose on a beer label.
No, you won't see sucrose on there.
So why not? Why don't you have to declare that?
Because it is. I don't actually know. It'd be probably because it's pretty much the same as a malt sugar. So it's still a fermented sugar. And the other possibility, I mean, I'm just surmising here, but the other possibility is that basically the sucrose is gone in the end. It's no longer there. It's been brewed away. So only guessing.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. But yeah, malt sugar. Yeah,
it's not an allergen.
No, it's not an allergen. Yeah, there's certain things. I don't actually know whether we have to declare findings anymore. I don't know whether it's even on the. There's not on there.
Well, I guess you got these things called processing aids, which technically are filtered back out. You don't have to declare them.
Yeah,
there's processing aid.
Processing aid and ingredients, and there's a fine line between them. I know there is. I have heard discussions before about what's a processing aid and what's an ingredient, and it comes down to whereabouts in the process you had it, pretty much.
Because I remember, I don't know if you read the label of Steinlager Pure, it says it only contains this, that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's other beers out there that do the same thing, but I guess I have to confess here, everybody knows this here on this video chat, but I lived in Germany for 8 years, and so I'm I'm a little bit of a purist with beer.
Yep.
Reinheitsgebot.
Reinheitsgebot, David.
Yeah, so for instance, Beck's is the only beer we make that doesn't have zinc for yeast health, because it's brewed under purity laws. So
cool.
So there are things like that. Steinlager Pure doesn't have adjuncts in, because I believe somewhere on the label it says made from all malt and all malt. It's got something on there that doesn't basically precludes you from putting adjuncts in it.
Right.
So there are certain things on the label that do trigger different things.
You mentioned findings before, David. Like
Yep.
in terms of the brew, I mean, what are you running for findings? Are you like talk about that at all? I mean, are you running sort of like isinglass or anything like that, or are you more using sort of like synthetics and polyclar and PVP and stuff?
We use kettle findings, and that's pretty much it.
What findings?
Kettle findings, which
So just
they're not the silicon based.
Carrageenan style.
Yeah. I think they're carrageenan
based.
Yeah. So, but that's pretty much it. Apart from that, we we don't add any clarification. As it goes through the cellar. We rely on the centrifuges and time and the filter to take it out.
Cool.
And there's the filter. So it's a cross flow filter. So it basically pumps around in circles and forces the clear beer through the membranes. So we've got 3 banks, 2 are in use at all times, and 1 is on cleaning, so we can continuously filter. And we do 150 hectolitres of green beer, which is pre-diluted per hour per bank. So we're running at 300, so 30,000 litres an hour through the filter unit. And there's pre-dilution, so if you dilute it by 20%, there's another however much it is. So that's a reasonably new technology. A lot of places have still got the diatomaceous earth filters, which do a good job as well, but they're a bit slower, and you've got there's
media is a prick.
Yeah, health risks with getting rid of the media and stuff like that. So this is one of the new toys that they got when they moved to the Pride. So, and it works well. I believe they're not very energy efficient because you have got big pumps basically pumping stuff around and around in circles. But they do a great job, and they don't get much trouble with them at all. And that was about it. That was all I had. So, I guess if there's any more questions.
What's in your homebrew tank at the moment?
I've actually I've tried to brew a proper Pilsner. Proper Pilsner. So I've got to see how it comes out. I need to actually cool it pretty shortly.
Is it a German style or?
It is a Bavarian style. So yes. But I actually splashed out and bought myself a SS Uni tank when we moved house. So that's onto its third brew now, I think.
So, and how are you controlling temperature?
What's that? Got a little glycol chiller.
As part of the unit tank thing?
I bought it's not an SS Brewtech one, but I've got a little chiller hooked up to it. So I'm trying to replicate the big brewery at home at the moment. So
that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I was trying to figure out, because you've got the bottom valve on to dump all the troubled yeast in that out. And I've been thinking about it for the last couple of weeks of how I could actually open that and guarantee that no air is going to bubble back up through the brew if I do that. So
heat pressure.
Yeah, I think it'd be fine, but yeah, I'll have
put a
to
bit of heat pressure on it. That's what I.
Yeah.
You can't do it in ambient; it will bubble in.
Yeah. So yeah.
You do we call them sealed transfers and everything into your kegs.
Yeah. So I got that all set up.
So you're pretty keen on stopping any oxygen at all getting in there in contact with the.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Because I generally don't drink fast enough, so it's a couple of months in the keg as well. Well, especially during lockdown, it has been. They haven't had any friends come over.
Did you brew the Western Brewers Conference brown ale?
I did, and I've probably got 3 or 4 litres left. But it's I might have to brew another one because I actually quite enjoyed it.
I'm gutted when I heard that. I've had a chance to try some of the beers that we're going to be in, and I reckon it'll be one of the strongest lineups I've seen so far, based on what I tasted. They were stunning. I mean, several of them are as good as any of the commercial examples we've ever tried.
Yeah, because they're supposed to be quite caramelly, eh?
Depends on whether you go for it. Like, that's the big thing. It's quite a broad style. Like in the north, they're sort of quite dry and very mineral driven, and then you got your London brown ales that are quite sweet in comparison, and then anything in between. I think probably wars have been fought over which particular region of England does different. I mean, Ian would be able to comment on that far more than I could. He's a bit more familiar with them, but
to be honest, my understanding of brown ales was, and I'm sure David will confer, was essentially they took standard bitter and added caramel to it and called it brown ale. So
Newcastle brown, that sort of thing.
No, Newcastle brown is a pale ale. Was never a brown ale.
Yeah.
It's just
it's a blend, isn't it?
It's an outlier that throws everybody.
Yeah.
But and it's generally munted when you drink it because it comes in a clear bottle.
Yeah, true. I actually don't think the brown ale deserves the accolade it gets because it was never a style. I mean, shoot me down if I'm wrong, but David Whitehead, what do you think?
He's probably still on mute by the looks of it.
Oh, okay. When I'm going back to the 7 years I spent in England, or the UK, I should say, and brown ales just didn't exist. The Americans picked up on the brown ale theme and ran with it, same as they ran with IPAs.
Yeah.
So, it's a non-style for me, if that makes sense.
There's lots of them like that. I mean, you go to Belgium and you ask a Belgian for a saison, and they'll look at you like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" They call it beer.
Yeah.
That's actually a good point. I mean, the Americans love to put labels on things.
David, if I can just ask you, I really like your thoughts on the oxygen, because I don't do these oxygen transfer, but I put in stuff in kegs and I purge the fuck out of it and everything, the hell out of it. Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, because you got this thing, dissolved oxygen. Like, how much of the oxygen by doing that without, I do flush the keg with CO2 and everything, but then the top's open and stuff. So how much dissolved oxygen do you actually think gets in the beer, and how critical is that if I kind of like flush it afterwards?
I think if you flush it pretty quick, you're okay. And the other thing you can do is actually blow CO2 through it. So like bubble it back down. If you can actually bubble it back down and then through it, and that actually strips out the any oxygen that's in there as well.
Also, like down to the out dip tube.
Yeah. If you can do that. So, if you do think you've got a fair amount of beer in there, then you can actually, if you blow it down through, it'll actually bubble through and actually strip the oxygen out. So that's always a way. But I think if you and the one thing that does make me laugh is when people say, CO2 is heavier than air, so it'll all stay in there, which is, I guess, true to a certain point. But if you lie down on the ground outside, are you going to die of CO2 poisoning? It all mixes in.
The molecular speed of oxygen is 30 meters per second, and its diffusion rate is about half to 2.5 meters per second. Your CO2 blanket, unless it's moving or being replenished, lasts not very long. I mean, like when you're filling a keg, you're getting CO2 breaking out as you think, and so that forms a continual replenishing blanket on top of your beer. So that's not too bad. Tell you the single biggest thing, we did a whole lot of tests. I got access to a proper optical diometer a couple of years ago. We were actually running. The single biggest bit of suggestion I give to homebrewers: dry your kegs before you fill them. Your biggest source of dissolved oxygen in kegs is in the water that's sitting on the side and coating thing. And if you were taught sort of like, now you want to do everything on foam, like with Star Sand. Well, do you know what each little bubble of foam contains? And it's getting direct contact. So if you dry, same with your bottling, wash them and rinse them, sanitize them, then dry them. Same with your kegs, fill them dry, and you'll halve the amount of DO pickup that you get. And then the blanket that'll break out on top of sit on top of the beer as you continue, because as you're putting beer in, there's more CO2 just keeps on coming off, and that actively pushes the oxygen out. And I
So
mean,
you reckon, like, sanitize a whole heap of kegs and then put a lid on them.
Breweries might just should be conditioned, but they wouldn't check.
What have you done, David? You've broken.
In them, man. But I mean, like, I know a lot of you back.
Hang on. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. I think I'm back.
Yeah, I just went through a time warp there.
Froze
What the
up
hell
again.
happened?
Yeah, everyone was suddenly dancing and doing these funny things in front of me.
I didn't hear you either, Dave. You just turned robot for that whole monologue.
I think I'm back now.
Yeah, you're good.
I think the kids are probably bloody watching movies and video chatting to their friends on 2 devices and.
Can you hear me, David?
Yep. Yeah, I'm back.
I think it's just me and you. Nobody else.
I can see some other people kind of moving. Yeah, I don't know what happened there at all.
It all got a bit too technical, I think. Zoom crapped out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, maybe it was the Zoom.
Okay. So what type of equipment are you brewing on now, David?
So I've got the old Grainfather G30.
Oh, that's right. You said that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I've got the uni tank with the glycol chiller and keg fridge with kegs. So I've slowly sort of built up over the last 10 years. I started brewing a bag for a start over a gas element for a while, and then went up to the old chili bin mash tun, and then sort of went from there and went to the Grainfather. And then I had some stainless steel brew buckets, and then they've sort of evolved upwards, and then ended up with the uni tank. So it's been a slow but gradual sort of increase of equipment without too many people noticing.
Yeah.
One person in particular.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. It's been difficult for me in lockdown because I can't pay with cash.
Yeah, it's all traceable now.
Yeah.
I've discovered the magic number in brewing is 3. Your partners can never tell if there's more than 3 of something. It's like 1, 2, and then it's like many. So lots. 3, and 6 are the same.
Yeah.
So I guess, David, you working for a brewery, there's no reason for you to upscale from a G30 to a G40 or G70, whatever.
Well, I was looking at those G40s actually. Has anyone got one?
I have the G70. I jumped.
70.
I jumped first.
I'm going to get one when they're in the country.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, they look
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at the S series. With the S series, David, it's the same stuff without the bells and whistles that you probably don't need.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, build quality's not quite as good on them, but
because it would be nice to be able to do 2 kegs at once.
Yeah, but David's got the same problem as I have. You got to have someone to drink it fast enough.
Yeah.
But that's when you go and you buy a counter bottle filler. You can fill bottles.
It's what neighbours are for.
Yeah.
Get some friends, Reese. Yeah.
Because we moved house about it was about June or July we moved in. So I've got all these new neighbours that I can see outside drinking wine and stuff, and we've been in lockdown, so I haven't been able to invite them over. so I've got a feeling, that's why the Pilsner's down. I've got another one going down straight after, because I've got a feeling once we come out of lockdown in the summer, I could have the opposite problem.
Yeah. Robert, where's your lime red singlet? I was hoping you were going to be sporting that tonight.
I'm waiting for the. I'm waiting for the email. The click and collect. Go down to New Lynn and get it. Okay. Westy warehouse.
What are your favourite in-house drops, Dave?
What do I drink? I drink generally Supercharger. Like I was saying to Reese earlier, I don't actually buy a lot of Lion beer. I tend to drink smaller amounts of the craft beers. But the last couple of times when I've had people over, I've been down and just bought the old Magic Hour because it's 28 bucks for 10 or 12. So it's for its price, just to put it in the fridge for a barbecue. It's pretty good.
But you don't get any employee discounts, anything on beer?
We do have a staff shop, but that only runs when we don't have COVID. And we do get an allowance at Liquor King, which they're basically selling off at the moment. So I don't know what's going to happen to that. But yeah, and then we get, we do since, because as Alyssa said, I've just gone over to do 6 months in packaging as a secondment over there. But when I was in brewing, we do, so from a sensory point of view, we do beer clearance every day. So every day at 9:30, you rock on over to the lab and you basically taste everything that's been bottled in the last 24 hours as a group, just making sure that there's no issues with it. And then also when I was on shift in brewing, every tank that gets filtered gets tasted by 3 people out of the control room before it gets passed to go to bottling. So there's a fair amount of sort of sampling and tasting that gets done anyway.
And what sort of things do you detect?
You're mainly looking for, I guess, sort of anything. So you don't do. There's 2 levels. There's fault tasting, which basically you're looking for, things like sour, caustic contamination, anything you can pick up like that that's odd.
Right.
And then the next level up is actual profilers, and they do true to type tasting. So they'll blind taste test beer, and they'll rate it, maltiness, hoppiness, esters, all that stuff, and that gets compared to what it should be. So they're actually testing for true to type. Is this line read the same as the last line read we made? They're looking for consistency.
So comparing it back to like a BJCP style thing, they've got the criteria for line read, and then you're judging against that.
That is for the profiling that they do. So when we taste it before it's released, we're just looking for faults.
Right.
So sort of anything that's odd. Is it high bitterness? Is it tart? Does it taste a bit soapy? Does it taste?
Just make sure it ships without any sort of character at all.
That's right. Yeah. Make sure there's hang on. That line read's got some flavor. There's something wrong with it. Yeah. But so there's a fair amount. So you get, and it was quite interesting because we're a safety sensitive site because of all the machinery. We've actually got 0 tolerance, 0 alcohol level.
Yeah, sure.
Anywhere on site.
How do you manage that one?
So we've got
thresholds, Dave. Thresholds.
Yeah, we got 2 different levels. So everyone has a 0 limit, except if you're doing tasting, and then I think it's up to 100 micrograms. So we've actually got a breathalyzer in there, but you're pretty much certain that when you're blowing over 100, it's not actually real, because most of it's sort of in your mouth and your breath. So quite often you've got to stand there for 10 minutes and wait till you get back down to 0, but you're always pretty good. You're only tasting, you're not actually drinking the whole beer. And you do have to swallow it, you don't spit it out. That's one thing you're told. You're not allowed to spit the beer out if you're tasting it. So, and that's mainly due to sort of the retronasal stuff you get as well as just the taste. So it's not like wine where you spit it out, you actually have to drink it.
Most of your bitterness receptors are all on back palate, so you kind of,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you can't spit beer.
No, you can't. It's terrible. We have had the odd health and safety person that comes through that is not from the industry that says, "Oh, you need to spit it out." And it's like, well, you can't. It's not the way it works. So,
Who brought your sensory team then? I mean, you draft your sensory team from right through the business, like that sort of German model, or do you?
Yeah, no, we've got everyone. So I started doing sensory when I first started, when I was just an electrician. I started doing sensory. So you have to pass a test. I think you got to pick. There's 10 common faults that you're trained to pick up, And when you do your test, I think you've got to get 8 out of 10, and then you get cleared as a beer clearance person. The people that do profiling, they do it's called TVS. It's technical something or other, but that's basically they can pick out what faults what as well. So they'll be able to. Whereas when you're doing clearance, you just have to say there's something wrong with it. You don't actually have to know that it's it's sulfur or it's diacetyl.
Okay, so just a go no go thing.
It's a go no go. Whereas the profilers, there's probably about 10 or a dozen of them, and they generally.
Tim was on that team, wasn't he, Dave?
Yeah, Tim actually led that team.
He ran it, he designed the protocols, yeah.
He did, yeah.
Because a lot of it's all
yeah,
statistical. I mean, that's the whole thing, is that you asked before about does it equate to BJCP, and it's not. It's what Alyssa was talking about, that there's a software solution, a program they all use, where everyone putting in all their markers and ratings. It's designed to show statistical blips across a group. So it's quite a different process to what we're used to and what we use. It's quite fascinating.
Tim might be an interesting chap to get on one of these sessions.
Well, he is, because he's one of the brewers at Garage Project now. So yeah,
he is. Yeah.
David, you were talking about having your morning sessions at 9:30 or whatever, and you're tasting maybe faults or maybe just very slight variabilities. Do you have a system where you can bring 55,000 odd litres back to a standard beer again if it has a fault or if it has a variation?
To a point, yes. If we have something that's analytically not correct, like it's too high in bitterness, or the colour's not quite right, or there's certain things that get trimmed as you filter it. Obviously, there's things like hop additions, hop extracts that go in. So things like tetra hop, which is a hop addition. So everything's brewed kind of there or thereabout, and then it's trimmed when we actually filter and dilute it. So you can put colour in, you can put bitterness in. So anything that's not quite right.
You can't take bitterness out, though, can you?
No, but if you over bitter it, you can actually blend a bit of the original beer that you don't add the tetra hop to into it.
Right.
A lot of the bittering's added pre-packaging. It's you post isomerized hop, so it's a bit different.
Yeah, it's just trimming it. So so you can, you do have to rework beer sometimes. Sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes you'll make a brew where something goes wrong in the brew house, and it'll be, something gets added wrong and it ends up too high a colour or something. So you hold that batch and you do another batch. We generally don't do a correction batch where we fuck it up in the opposite direction to fix it. We'll tend to just make the normal batch and then blend them through until it's gone.
Do you get very often where you have to dump the whole brew?
Not very often at all, no. No,
I wouldn't expect so, but on a home brew scale, that's a distinct possibility.
Yeah. No, it's generally analytical stuff rather than actual. Like we don't get infections or anything like that.
Are you on site GCMS out at the Pride?
What's that, sorry, Dave?
You're running GCMS in the lab outside at the Pride on site? Like, are you doing DCMS testing and profiling before packaging?
Yeah. So we it's everything. We try and catch everything before it goes into a bottle, because once it's in a bottle you can't fix it, and packaging pretty much triples the cost of the beer. So as soon as it's into a bottle, first of all you can't fix it, and second of all, if you have to dump it, it's freaking expensive. So you'd rather, if you ever did have to dump a batch, you'd rather dump it before it.
At what point is it attracting excise?
When it leaves site.
Right. Yeah. So pre-packaging.
Yeah. So it leaves.
Pre-distribution.
Yeah. So our warehouse on site is a customs bonded area, so we basically pay tax when it leaves the site. But in saying that, we do. They must somehow track what we do, because if we do dump anything, we have to apply for excise remission. So they must have an expectation of what goes in and what's going to come out somehow.
Yes, marrying up the
Yeah, there must be some sort of rough reconciliation they do. But yeah, I don't think we've dumped any great volume of beer since I've been there. So it's at 3 years.
It's a new factory, so it'll all be biologically clean, I would assume. But what's DCMS? What's that?
What's the stand for?
Oh, it's shit. It's a cool device that basically gives you a molecular breakdown of the whole beer. Shit, you can ask me after 3 beers what
Is it bacteria? Is it?
Oh, it's gas chromatography, mass spectrometry. It's basically you vaporize a sample, you run it through this coil that slows it down based on its molecular weight, and then you read the count of each each weight of molecule that comes off it. What it means is they can break it, they can run it through that, and they'll know, absolutely empirically how much diacetyls in it, all the other little fault markers, any kind of VDKs, ester levels, and everything else like that. They can get it like as a readout. That'll so you got you. And what Dave's saying is quite cool, because even with all these really wicked tools, it's amazing how much is still done on the human tongue and nose.
Yep, that's right. Yeah,
It's just like a gas chromatography test where you're just gonna have your spectrum and your.
So diacetyl, we run it through for diacetyl. Every fermenter gets tested for diacetyl before it's moved on.
So what do you do in the process for diacetyl? Is there a concept of a diacetyl vest?
So we basically know how long we ferment for before, because we've been doing it so long. And we know that a certain number of days after it reaches attenuation, the diacetyl should be in. But it still gets tested. Everyone still gets run through the HPLC and tested just to make sure it's within limit. And then it gets moved on. Then it gets retested in maturation just in case. So one interesting thing which can occur, which gets talked about a bit, is hop creep, where diacetyl actually comes up after dry hopping.
Right, and that potentially the way that you're doing the dry hopping, I guess, if you're tipping in 20 kg, are they being pre-purged with CO2 or anything before they go in?
It's more around, there's some sort of sugars that get released by the hops during the biotransformation, and they will actually, if there's any yeast in there, they'll reactivate and slightly ferment. And because
the enzymes on the hops themselves that break down residual multitriers and a few other things.
Yeah, and so you get a slight fermentation. So because the yeast starts fermenting, it releases diacetyl.
Or hop creep, isn't it?
Yeah, hop creep. Yeah. So it's another interesting concept as well.
Has it been much of an issue for you guys?
No.
That's a consideration, or is it been, but hasn't really been a problem?
It's a consideration, yeah. I know there was discussion about it when we moved Panhead over, when we started doing that, but it's not a major thing. But it is something that does get talked about, especially with all these dry hop beers now that are so heavily dry hopped.
But Panhead's only around 6% anyway, right? So I guess it's the top end of your sort of normal range, but
but the ABV's probably got nothing to do in terms of relation to hopping load or whatever.
Now the hop load, that'll be the highest hop beer we do is supercharger. So, yeah, expensive beer to put hops in. But, it took us a few goes, but we're pretty stable making it now. It's coming out pretty well. So it was an interesting process. I was there it was actually quite cool, because I was there when we did when Apparition came through the first time, the one that Alyssa made, and I was there when we put Panhead through for the first few times as well, which was good. So it's different. As I said before, far different utilization of the equipment than what it was ever intended for when it was made. A system designed to make perfectly clear beer, and now you're trying to keep it hazy. And every now and then the equipment slips and you get one through, and it's like, fuck, where did the haze go? So that happens.
So Where do you get all the gear from? Those massive tanks? How did they get into the country, or they manufactured here? Or?
No, they were all, a lot of those tanks came from Khyber Pass, from the old brewery. Some came from, because the other thing that happened as well is just after they commissioned the Pride, the Canterbury earthquake happened, and they decided not to rebuild the Canterbury brewery. So there are a couple of tanks. I think there might be half a dozen tanks that actually came up from Canterbury that were relocated, the ones that were still okay.
You're talking, Paul, you're talking tanks or brew house?
Oh, just the fermentation vessels.
Yeah, no, they're all local. Even the ones that they remade, they were all made by a local crowd. I think shipping would probably be quite prohibitive because big empty space.
Yeah. Volumetric wouldn't be good.
Yeah, wouldn't be good. No, you're shipping a whole lot of air.
Because Brewhouse is only about 3 companies that'll make that kind of size globally. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yours is a Cronus.
Yep. Yeah, it's all Cronus. Yeah. So they did all that, and a lot of our filling packaging equipment's Cronus as well. So we've got. Yeah, they bought a couple of new fillers when they moved over here, and that's they're both Crohn's ones. So so the can filler does 1,000 cans a minute.
Tell it to crafty cannons.
Yeah. and then our fastest bottler can do 960 bottles a minute.
Your bottling system is fucking stunning. I've been out to the Pride twice, and that's the thing that blows you away. You go out to that bottling plant, and it is just like, holy shit.
Yeah. And you think, who drinks all this beer? But, someone does. So.
So your canning system, is it, is it counter pressure, or just ambient fill?
No, it's counter pressure. So it's actually it's a volumetric filler as well, so it actually knows exactly how much is going in. So it gets counter pressure filled, and then it comes off that basically under a CO2 blanket until it has the lid.
Okay, so you do ambient control, sweet.
Yeah. So the actual fill's counter pressure, and then so same as the bottles, they counter pressure fill, then they come off into ambient. The cans have got a bit. Bottles don't, cans do.
Okay.
So the bottles they actually fob them. So you got a little.
You're not fobbing cans.
No,
cool.
The cans come off, and they just get CO2 blown across them. I mean, they do fob a little bit, but that's the idea behind the volumetric filler is you put exactly the right amount in, so you're not giving beer away. So you can't, if you start fobbing, you can't control how much is in your can. So whereas the bottles, you put a bit extra in and try and fob some out. So it's the same principle as as capping on foam. It's exactly the same thing. It comes off, and then they shoot a little bit of hot water in, and that foams it up, and then it goes around and caps it.
But with the canning, you basically you're capping on a blanket rather than foam.
Yeah.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, that's brilliant, Dave. If you've had enough and you want to bugger off, you're very welcome.
Another 15 minutes, then I've got to go to bed. I've got to start work at 6 o'clock, so it's a hard life. Alyssa's still there now, but I've got to start early.